Great. So good evening to you all, and we're delighted to have you here. I see we have so far on screen 25 people. We have around 80 people that actually signed up for this event, which is a great turnout, and obviously it's a very hot topic. So David, you're going to have lots of interesting things to talk about. So good evening and official welcome. My name is Lesley Kaplan, and I've been running AACI events for many, many years now. This is part of the Bouncing Back Series, which is part and founded and funded by the Reinhardt Family Foundation. So thank you to AACI and thank you to the Reinhardt Foundation as well for making this event possible. What we did was during Corona, we started this as a series of different talks and community events that would appeal to people and give information, and certainly a topic about banking and questions that you can ask your bank manager where they're not always so accessible. This is something that we thought would be of interest, and I'm sure that you'll find and get a lot out of this interesting talk this evening. So thank you again for AACI for the sponsoring. So as I mentioned, my name is Lesley Kaplan. I've been working with AACI as long as I can remember. I work also with businesses, organizations in terms of building and branding their business. And this is part of also building and branding yourself. So maybe not branding here, but certainly building yourselves and building your wealth and building your family and your community. So it fitted in well. We have a very special guest tonight, David Baruch. Thank you, David, for agreeing to be our guest this evening on this, as I say, very hot topic. I've known David actually for many, many years now. I haven't seen him for many years as well, but I've known him for many years. I know his lovely wife as well. And just to give you a little bit of an introduction, besides what you saw in the advert for this event, David is a former bank manager of Bank Hapoalim. He was a bank manager for over 16 years, working with different communities across the board, from Anglos to Arabs to Haredim to religious, non-religious, everything. So he's had experience with a wide range and in a wide range of areas and with a wide range of people. And more recently, he left the bank and has decided to follow his passion, which is becoming a tour guide, and he's almost qualified as a tour guide. So, you know, that's also something great to see. That I'm sure he was passionate about banking for many, many years, and then he decided to take another track. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce David Baruch to you. David, I'm going to spotlight you so that people will be able to see you large as well on the screen. For now, please, if you can all stay muted, and any questions that you do have to write in the chat. I see we already do have a question. If I don't read out your question to David right away, please be patient, because we want to make sure that it's read out at an appropriate time and place. And there are topics that he's going to come to, which I know that he'll more than likely answer this as well. So I will be going through the chat also throughout the entire evening to see if there's anything I've missed as well. Okay, so make yourselves comfortable. David, the floor is yours. I'm going to be spotlighting you now.
I feel spotlighted. I'm not that photogenic, but thank you anyways. And it's wonderful to be with you this evening. I will start with a couple of caveats. First of all, Erev Tov, good evening, and Chodesh Tov to everybody. I had been a bank manager. I worked for Bank Hapoalim for close to 35 years. The last 16 or so of them, I was a manager in various branches in the Jerusalem area. I didn't leave for any bad reasons. I left because I decided I needed a change, and not a terrible thing to do. And I'm doing a wonderful thing right now. Hopefully sometime in the next half a year, I will finish all the exams and all the coursework that I'm doing. And then you can call me up, and if you want me to be your tour guide in Yerushalayim or anywhere else in Israel, I'll be happy to speak to you about that as well. What I want to do with you this evening is we'll start with some basic information. I think everyone, let's like flatten the board, as they say, make sure that we get the basics out of the way. And then we could talk about things such as dealing with debt, credit card debt, overdrafts, banking costs and whatnot of that, getting into maybe digital, maybe some investment stuff as well. I'm not an investment advisor. And by law, in order to give advice on investments, you have to speak with a licensed investment advisor. I can point you in the right direction around those things. And if somebody needs some information about banking, business banking and whatnot, I can go into that as well. I'm going to be speaking generalities. Each one of us has our own individual needs vis-a-vis the bank. I don't necessarily want to get into individual things, rather talk about things that are interesting to everybody and are pertinent to everybody. And with that, I'd like to go. Actually, I used to give this talk years and years ago in English, and I would title my talk, Banking in Israel, a guide for the perplexed by my money dies. Now, things over the years, and I started in the banking industry here in Israel in 1986 when I made Aliyah, and things have definitely changed over the years. Most of you, this is AACI, so you're either coming from the States or from Canada, and the system here has changed over the years. You need to remember one thing right off from the start. The bank, on the one hand, is not your partner in business, or is not your partner. And the bank is also a business. The banks are not here as nonprofit organizations. Banks are out to make money. That doesn't need to concern you. What needs to concern you is what you're paying and what you're going to be doing. But always keep in mind that there is another side as well, sitting across from you at the table. I'm not representing, I worked for Bank Hapoalim for close to 35 years. I'm not representing the bank. And I'm going to be speaking banking in general. I may go back to Bank Hapoalim in terms of referring to something from my past or whatever. I'm not here as a Bank Hapoalim. And now that I've gotten all of these out of the way, that, I disclaimers and everything else, now I can start talking. And the first thing is that may interest some of you as well. What we need to talk about are the basics of what is ownership of a bank account. If they're joint owners, it's really important to get one thing out of the way right now. If those of you who are old timers here in Israel, by the way, if I speak too much Hebrew, Lesley, I'm going to ask you, please, if I put in too many Hebrew words and I don't translate them, please let me know, okay? Because I have this habit of doing that. I apologize already up front. Now, it's important for any of you, if you're old timers here in Israel already and you've opened up a joint account more than 20 years ago, make sure you have in your account, and this is homework for you later on, to check if there is what's called a Seif Arichut Yamim. What does that mean? It means that chas v'shalom, but it's going to happen eventually to all of us. One of us in a joint account, let's say my wife and I have a joint account, which we do, and yesterday one of us hit the 120 and alach lo'olam haba, and it didn't happen, so I could talk about it. This article in the contract between us and the bank allows the surviving member account holder to continue doing day-to-day activities in the account. Now, that's very important, because otherwise, if you don't have this article in your contract with the bank, and it's only in most of the banks, but you should all check it, but in most of the banks, it's over the last 20 years, it's become the B'rirat Mechdal, it's become the standard way, the deferral option. So it's pretty standard, but those of us who have opened accounts many years before that should actually check this out, because without this, your account, if one of the account owners in a partnership of an account, it doesn't have to be husband and wife, by the way, it could be business partners, or it could be brother and sister, or just two friends or whatever. If one of them gets to 120 without having this, you're stuck and your account is frozen until it hits probate and all that kind of stuff. So it's really important to get that checked out. Now, another issue that these are things that have been brought up to me over the years, is many of us who have parents who have accounts here in Israel, or that are getting into their senior years, or have children who may have just finished the army and are traveling over around the world or whatever, and they want to give power of attorney to their kids, or their parents think it's necessary, or we, as we get older, we want to give power of attorney to somebody. It's very important to think about these issues and to discuss them beforehand. Am I clear on this, Lesley? You got to give me some feedback, because I don't have you in front of me, so it's hard for me to see if I'm getting this point across. But it's
right,
very
you're clear. In fact, we have a question that I think is related to this, which you can answer. That somebody asked if they have a relative that they want them to help them follow what's going on in their account or anything, but they don't want them to have permission to use the monies or to make any changes. So that is kind of related to what you're saying. Can you answer that as well?
Okay, it's a bit problematic because they want them to be able to see things, but they don't want them to be able to do things in the account. There are ways of, in most of the banks, they do allow them to do this on the internet, to see things. Businesses certainly have that ability because they have people that do their bookkeeping or whatnot, and they give their bookkeepers a user rights to see but not to do transactions. For individuals, it's a bit more problematic. Be very careful who you give your internet information to, because usually when you sign up with banks to do internet transactions, you're going to be able to do transactions yourself. If you're giving them your codes and whatnot, they're going in as you into the computer, into the bank, and then they can do transactions whether you want them to or not. So if you want to give somebody internet access to your account for seeing things only, in most of the banks, from what I understand, it is possible, but be very careful. But be careful that you're not giving them transactions as well. Many people want to, as they get older, and we never know if we're going to get sick or we're going to be incapacitated for a short period or not a short period of time. One of the things you can do is give somebody what's called in Hebrew ipui koach, or power of attorney in your account, or signing powers in your account. That doesn't, by the way, give them ability to take loans for you, or even overdraft for you, or even order a credit card for you. You have to be the one to be able to do that for them. But it does give them ability to do transactions in the account, transferring money. Also, by law, they aren't allowed to transfer money to themselves. If they are a power of attorney for you, they can't do transactions from your account to them. For instance, an elderly parent wants their children to be doing transactions for them, and one of the kids took out of his own pocket and paid someone, and now he wants the money back. He can't do the transfer from the account that he's a power of attorney into his own account, because he's supposed to be doing things for the betterment of the person he's the power of attorney for, or the signature for that person. It's an important little thing that you need to know. Now, the one last thing I wanted to do on this issue before I go on to some of the other issues is I mentioned that if somebody passes away and they're surviving member in the accounts, they can do transactions for day-to-day activities. If somebody has 100,000 shekels in the account, a couple has 100,000 shekels in the account, that doesn't mean the second that the surviving account holder is the only one there, that person can take out those 100,000 shekels. No, you're only allowed to do day-to-day things, to pay bills, to pay rent money, to pay the mortgage, to pay things that are within reason. And it's very cloudy what is within reason, but it's up to the individual bank manager to decide that if there is an issue, and then you have to talk to them about that. But for all the other funds, you'll have to go through probate through family court. For Yerushalmim, it's in Givat Shaul, and that's a process that usually takes around 3 months or so to get through the whole process, usually 3 months or so. I've heard less, I've definitely heard more. But to have a will probated, that's usually about the time it takes, from my experience. Many people talk to me, and I know that one of the questions that was already asked beforehand is about saving money. How can I not pay commissions and whatnot for banking? Let's get this off. In the States, you don't get nickel and dime for every transaction you do. Here in Israel, that's the standard of nickel and diming. There are banks, by the way, who don't charge at all, and there are banks that do charge. I know Bank Yahav, for instance, doesn't charge for transactions. It's a line fee. They say usually a shekel 35 or shekel and a half or whatever. Other banks do charge. The bank I worked for does charge. They have all sorts of packages of services that you can get. But let's be honest with ourselves. It's very common that we all like to complain about how much we're paying and everything like that. But when push comes to shove, we're really not paying that much money every month for these fees. However, it's an individual thing, how much. No one wants to pay anything if they don't have to, but you may want to think about what I'm getting. If the service I'm getting at the bank is worth it, then I'm willing to pay it. If the service isn't good, then I shouldn't have to pay it. And that's something, there is room to also talk to your bankers and to try and whittle it down. You can often get even 50%. I know for elderly and for disabled people, the banks usually have, it's usually 50 to 100%. I don't remember exactly how much it is today. As I have, for the last year, I have not been in the industry. So I can't tell you exactly how much they're charging today, but it's usually 50 to 100% off for elderly and disabled people. But there's nothing in law that says they have to. Okay.
So David, 2 questions. Number one, then would one have to approach the bank in order to get the discount for an elderly person? Or is it automatic that they see your age, etc.?
My experience is it used to be automatic, and then it stopped being automatic a couple of years ago. So it would behoove them to approach the bank. Now, it's not so easy to approach the bank these days, especially since the whole Corona thing and whatnot. But even for the elderly, most of the major banks have ways of digitally making appointments or calling somebody, calling a moked, calling a back office phone number. And the banks, even in English, I think they advertise those things, but they can call the banks and without having to go through with all the different codes and whatnot in order to get in order to make an appointment. They have that ability for people that are seniors and whatnot. The rest of us, if we haven't gotten to that age, we're going to get to that age, hopefully, but we still have to go through the rigmarole of making an appointment in order to get to the banks. That's usually what is the case. I know that in Bank Hapoalim, for instance, you don't need to make an appointment if you're going to go for a cash transaction. They have, it's not on King George 16, but it's in the back of the building. They have the whole floor just with cashiers and whatnot and machines. And you don't need to make an appointment there, but if you're doing something that isn't a cash transaction, then you do need to make an appointment. And I think it's the same way in most of the other banks as well.
Okay.
Does that answer that question? I'd
like to say, yeah, actually, before you move on. So number one, I found certainly if you're a business owner, if you have a business account, that very often you get an email address or 2 that you can write to and ask questions via that. I also bank with Bank Hapoalim, and I find that very efficient, and they always respond to emails. So if you're not a business owner, that may be different. You may not have as much access, but I find that does make a difference.
Most bankers in Israel today, although it depends, and here the differences between banks, it's not necessarily, it can even be between branches of banks. If you find the right people that are giving you the service, part of service, and this is what you really need to push for as well, part of service is getting somebody's email address and being able to be in contact with them. Many bankers don't like to initially give it to you for some reason. I don't know, it drives me crazy. when the branches that I managed, my workers would give out their email address because they know it was a basic thing that I demanded from them. Not everyone does. Find that person who you can actually talk with. And it's not necessarily only for business bankers, it's also private banking. They have that ability. And general banking as well. There are people with emails and email addresses. So that's a good point that you brought up, Lesley. Thank you.
Right. David, before we move on to a new topic, there's a question also to do with bank accounts. If somebody has a business, do you recommend having two separate accounts, one for family transactions, one for business? And if so, how can one work with the bank then in order not to pay full bank charges if you've got two different accounts? What from your experience works?
In general, I do suggest separating the business from the family or the individual account. It just makes it a lot easier. Now, there's something that I always talk about is there's the triangle of people that we should all be talking about if we're getting into the business side of things just really quickly, and I'll get back to it later. There's that triangle of who are the people we should be speaking with: the attorney, the accountant, and the banker. And each one of them has different things that they can add from their perspective to talk about the nuances of how people should be doing things. I know that accountants always tell their customers, always have separate bank accounts. And from my point of view as well. Now that brings us back to the point of we don't want to be double dipped in terms of commissions and whatnot. Also, certain businesses they pay differently than individuals in terms of what they're charged by the banks. Most banks, by the way, will differentiate between a large business and a small business. But this is important for you to get in touch with the bank about that. And small businesses are usually charged similar to individual accounts, but not always. And you really need to speak to your bank about that. And yes, you can haggle, I'm going to use the word haggle, with the bank in terms to bring down the charges as well. Sometimes it doesn't work, but oftentimes it does.
Okay, just one more question that we have about Arichat Yamim or power of attorney before we move on. So firstly, for these, we have to go directly into the bank, I assume, for obvious reasons. That's not something that you can do online.
It's not something you can usually do online, and it's important because you want to make sure that you're covered. Okay, and certain things. So it'll take the hour of travel time to the bank, and usually if you're making an appointment, so they are pretty good about keeping appointments in most of the branches and most of the banks. So that you're saving time these days by having to make an appointment, and it's important to go there and make sure that you've got everything. That everything in the account, at least in terms of the setup, is the setup that you want. And it's a good opportunity as well to do the setup for the internet and to make sure that everything you have on the internet is what you want it to be. Also, in terms of telephone banking and whatnot, or faxing, giving, people still use faxes. Believe it or not, banks still use faxes. And to make sure that you're able to do all of those things as well. Take advantage of the fact that you made the appointment and make a list for yourself before you go in and cross it off, check it off as you go. That would be my suggestion to you.
Great. Just two more things before we move on. We spoke about different bank accounts, whether it's business or personal. Does it make a difference if it's with the same bank, the same branch, or with different banks? Number one. And the other question, actually, let's finish that first.
Okay. So I won't write it down then. If you're going to have a business account and a private account in the same bank, I would suggest that you do it within the same branch as well. It'll save you a lot of hassle, especially even for something as minimal as ordering a credit card, because banks give a credit card is still credit as far as the bank is concerned. And if you have one account in one place and another account, it just makes it more cumbersome in terms of getting the approval from two different branches, because it's the same credit. It's the individual is the one getting the credit. The business is owned by the individual, so the business and the individual will go together. So it keeps it all under one roof within the same bank. If you want to divide it up between two different banks, there are pluses and minuses to that. It depends on the individual and what the individual is doing, what the business itself is and whatnot. So it's really hard for me to discuss two different banks. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. With my clients, not just because I wanted all the business and whatnot, but I also, if I saw the whole picture, the individual, and I was able to help them plan their business, plan things accordingly. So I like to have everything under my roof, but not because I was being greedy and I wanted all their business. There were times when I told businesses that I can't give them everything and that they should split it up between two banks for the business itself. But the private and the business account needed to be both with me within Bank Hapoalim if it was in the same bank. Yes.
Great. Okay, good. And one more question regarding power of attorney before we move on to other topics. You've mentioned that a person who has power of attorney cannot transfer money to his own account. And the question is, what's stopping him transferring it to somebody else, to a spouse or to a child or to somebody else?
They can do that.
Right. So that's a risk. We have to just choose carefully who we give power of attorney. Basically.
Correct. But if the bank sees that you're transferring money, that you're a power of attorney for someone, because you're supposed to be going into their shoes, as they say, and doing things for the betterment of the person that you're the power of attorney. And by transferring money to yourself, it looks bad in the eyes of the attorneys or whatever who gave us the advice and whatnot. And it makes sense, by the way. So it doesn't stop them, by the way, from taking the credit card they have in the account, going to the ATM machine and taking out cash. But if they're doing a transfer, they shouldn't do a transfer to themselves. So yes, it's not foolproof and everything like that. I agree with you, but it's the concept and the theory behind it, it actually makes sense. Okay. Now, one of the things I do want to talk about a little bit, because it comes up a lot in the discussions that I have with people, are, we were known in Israel for many, many years as being, we have this thing called overdraft facilities, which back in the States and Canada, unless you're a business and you have a credit line or whatnot, it's an unheard of thing. But actually, I'm sorry to disillusion you, even back in the States, you did have this overdraft facility. We just called it credit card debt. It's the exact same thing. Actually, they're both really expensive. So yes, and one of the things I do, and I did with my clients, and actually I still do sometimes. Like I had a neighbor who came to me just this past week. They're in very good shape, whatnot, but he just wanted to make sure that he's handling his finances all right. And I sat down with him, and in the end, he's got money set aside because they're going to be building their house pretty soon. And yet he's got overdraft of, for purposes of this discussion, overdraft of 50,000 shekels, which is about 3 times, or 60,000 shekels, about 3 times their joint income, plus loans, plus he's sitting on X number of money, a few 100,000 or 600 something thousand shekels. And I just said, something's not right the way you're handling your expenses, your accounts right now. So we have to understand an overdraft facility, as far as I'm concerned, from my experience, and if you get into overdraft and you're staying at that same amount every month, you basically are maintaining a standing loan, which is quite expensive, by the way. And if you're not, you really only have to pay the interest on it every 3 months. And in a few days, we're all going to be paying that, because it's usually July for the previous 3 months, October for the previous 3 months, January for the previous months, and April for the previous 3 months. It's on a quarterly basis. So if you see any time between the 1st and 5th of July that you've just been debited in your account for interest, it's because you were in overdraft. Okay, now overdraft, it's a nice thing to have because no one wants to have a check bounced or whatnot. And by the way, in Israel, it's the only place I know that we allow people to have a check bounce, by the way, is illegal in most places, right? But in Israel, we give them actually 10 opportunities to have a check bounce before they really get punished. If anyone's heard of the term mugbal or limited, it only happens after the 10th check. I'm not going to go into that right now because hopefully we don't have people with that situation. If the question arises, then you can tell me, Lesley, and I'll talk about hagbalot, limitations on accounts and whatnot, but hopefully we won't need to do that. But sidebar closed now. A credit, an overdraft should be something that you use for a little period of time, a few days here or there, until your wage comes in or whatnot. If you're a self-employed person, whatever, we have to find out other ways to do it. Don't go into overdraft because they're very expensive loans. And there are all sorts of cheaper ways to take credit and loans. Banks are dying to give people loans today. I don't know how many, if any of you have been called up or whatnot by the bank, please take a loan. We want to give you this, that, or whatever, because that's how banks are making money today, by the way. Okay? But don't take a loan unless you need it. Loans shouldn't be used, in my opinion, and from my experience, I've only seen people get themselves into trouble if they're using loans for consumer, for being what we call in Hebrew, ashrei tzarchani, because you wanted to buy something that you really didn't need, or you think you do need, but you really don't need, or whatnot. And most certainly not in terms of in credit cards. If you're going to be going to the supermarket, and then this one gets me a lot, and unless you're doing an unusual shopping this month in your shopping, you should not be buying things in payments. Now, a lot of people do this. They go and they make payments. I've got 1,000 shekels. I'm going to do it in 4 payments. Okay, well, usually most of us are weekly or monthly shopping bill at the grocery store doesn't change that much. It's usually around 1,000 shekel. I'm just using 1,000 as an example, but it's usually around the same amount every month. So if I'm spending, for purposes of this conversation, 1,000 shekels every month, and I'm doing it in 4 payments at the supermarket of 250 shekels every month over 4 payments, the second month, I have to pay off 250 shekels, and I've done another shopping of 4 payments, and every month. So by the 4th month, I'm paying 1,000 shekels every month anyways, and I just delayed that payment. So please, if there's one thing I can get you to do out of this conversation, this little talk we're having today, is please don't buy your groceries on payments, unless it's something like Pesach or Rosh Hashanah or whatever, where oftentimes we have to pay a lot more, and then think twice or whatnot how you want to do it. But if possible, don't do your grocery shopping with payments. If you're buying a refrigerator and that's a large amount of money or whatever, that's something that's going to be, you're going to be using, excuse me for 1 second. I'm not used to talking so much. If you're going to be, and that's something that's going to be with you, that refrigerator or that consumer good is going to be with you for a long time, and it costs a lot, then you can think about doing it in payments. Now, here's the catch. There's 2 ways to do payments on your credit card. One is that the supplier is going to pay for the interest on that. And that's what's called in Hebrew, lelo ribit, without interest. Or the credit card company is going to charge you for doing those payments, and you're going to actually pay interest, and the interest is usually quite high. Is that clear, Lesley?
Mm-hmm. Very clear.
Okay.
Thank you, David.
Okay, because that's an important issue. If you're buying things on payments, make sure that you're asking the person who's selling you that machine or that car or that a major item if they're charging you interest by the credit card company, or if they're going to take the hit on the interest. If they're going to take the hit, then do it. If not, then you can think about different options in terms of financing. For instance, if it's a car, most of the banks have really, really cheap loans for new cars, by the way. Okay, so you may want to take, often that's something, it's an individual thing, but banks will give you cheap loans for cars. They'll put a lien on the car until the loan is over or whatnot, but what do you care, because you need the car anyways. And that's one thing. So it's important to differentiate between how you're going to be paying on the credit card, which way you're going to be doing it. So I talked about credit limits and credit cards, mortgages. It's a huge field. My own personal preference is to keep it as simple as possible. Now, I'm very conservative when I talk about these things. And thank God, when I took a mortgage years ago, we didn't have so many different options. And I think it's somewhat of a klala, it's a curse on us that we have so many different options, even though options are a wonderful thing. Because when I took it, you could either take a loan that was linked to the madad, to the consumer price index, to inflation, or you could take a loan that is non-linked, or now you could take it on a basis of the prime rate, which is the base rate in Israel, minus something or plus something, usually minus something. And then there's all sorts of other ways to do this as well. I like to keep things simple, especially now as we see that there's a lot of, because of what's happening around the world. It's not Israel, by the way. Prices are going up everywhere around the world. We like to complain and we like to think that we're the center of the world, and we are the center of the world, of course. But the rest of the world is being affected by what's going on as well. And prices are going up everywhere. Prices going up means that the central banks, or for us, the Bank of Israel, is going to raise interest rates in order to try and fight that inflation. And so we're getting hit on our mortgages, especially on the two main ways of, and the Bank of Israel just put out something, 70% or 75% of mortgages are affected by these price things, by either linkage to the prime rate or linkage to the consumer price index. Now, what's that mean? The consumer price index, the madad, is inflation. And every month, inflation rate goes up by 0.3, 0.5% or whatnot. Thank God we still aren't at the level of North America or Britain right now in terms of what our inflation rates are. But that in itself drags with it the reaction of raising the prime rate. So both of those are actually going up. And one eventually will affect bringing down the other, hopefully. But those rates are going to go up. I'm very conservative, as I said. I always like to push I like to know what I have to pay every month, and that's it. And I don't want it to change every month and whatnot. So what I did with my mortgage, as much as possible, and I wasn't able to do it too much because they didn't have non-linked mortgages back then, but I was able to a little bit with that. I try and keep things what's called ribit kvuah. It's not for everybody, and it's most mortgage advisors will tell you not to do this. I always tell people, think about it anyway, and because I'm very conservative and I want to know exactly what I have to pay and I don't want surprises. Other people think otherwise, and maybe economically it may be a little bit better, although I think it always evens out in the end. Go with a straight, non-linked mortgage. You may end up paying a little bit more right now, but over time, it all evens itself out. And I know that I have to pay X amount every month for my mortgage. Okay. By the way, many people often ask me what they need in terms of personal capital. Most banks usually ask for about 30% of personal capital when they're asking for loans. And the way the banks the first thing the banks do is they want to make sure that they don't want to take your house. Of course, you're going to put your house in lien against that's what a mortgage is. It's putting your house in lien against the loan, but banks are not going to kick you out of your house. Okay. It's just not good business. And it's not good to be seen on TV that bank X kicked somebody out of their house because they didn't pay their loan. So they're not going to, they're not in the interest of taking the collateral that you've just given them because you haven't paid, they're not interested in foreclosing. That being said, banks are always going to look and make sure as much as possible, because we're talking 20 and 30 years down the line, but they want to know that you have the ability to pay back the loan. And they do this for the most part. They're going to look at your net income, not your gross income, your net income, that actually ends up in your bank account. And they're going to say 35% of that net income is your ability to pay back all of your loans. Okay, if you have a car loan, let's say you have net income of, you have the 35% comes out to 3,500 or 5,000 shekels. Okay, we'll try and make this simple. You have 5,000 shekels, which is your 35% of your net income. But let's say you also have a car loan and you have credit card debt, and so you have to pay off every month X number of payments. So that all comes off of that 5,000, and what's left is what you can pay back a mortgage. I'm pretty sure I was clear on that, but I'm going to say it one more time. They take your net income, 35% of that. Now it could be 30%, sometimes 35%. But this is your negotiation part or whatever. But let's say 35% of that. Take off all the other loans that you have, and that's the amount that you'll be able to pay back over the 30 years or the 20 or 30 years, nachon to today. Obviously, nobody is a navi, a prophet of what's going to be in the future, but that's the way we all tend to look at it. Are there questions regarding that, Lesley?
Right, a couple of things, yes. So firstly, what is your opinion about mortgage advisor? Okay, I have an opinion about that, but I'll let you talk first from the bank's point of view.
I'm not going to tell from the bank's point of view. The banks work with mortgage advisors, by the way, because mortgage advisors bring the bank's business as well. They don't work with all of them. They have a list who they work with and whatnot. My basic opinion of mortgage advisors are, if you have income and you have the ability to pay back a loan, and a mortgage is a loan, that's what it is, and you have the ability to pay it back, and you're not problematic, and you don't have all sorts of red alerts on your name, your ID or whatever because of the past that you had or whatnot, you really don't need mortgage advisors. Okay? Mortgage advisors tend to charge you a lot of money, or sometimes what is a lot or not, I don't know, that's a relative thing, but they'll charge you, and they charge you up front. You're paying for them right now, and they're going to tell you, I'm saving you X amount of money, but they're saving you X amount of money over 20 or 30 years. Take that into account. Now, oftentimes, mortgage advisors are really good for those people who have a more complicated income base, or their income is from overseas and it's more difficult to prove to the bank what your income is, or oftentimes in Haredi circles, and the banks are aware of this as well, as oftentimes they're getting help from here and they're getting help from there, and they're getting a milga from there or whatnot. So oftentimes the banks look differently in Haredi circles of a person's ability to pay back a loan. So in cases that aren't straightforward, and by the way, most of us, in my experience, are pretty straightforward. Okay, but if you have, in cases of income, most of your income is from overseas, or you may have an age problem because there are age limitations, because unlike in North America, where somebody in their 70s can easily get a mortgage because they're mortgaging their property. And banks there have no problem with foreclosing on people, unlike here in Israel. They're looking more at the property and less at the individual. Here we're looking at the individual. And unfortunately, someone in their 70s who wants to take a 30-year loan, usually most of us aren't going to make it to 100. And that's the way the bank is looking at it as well. So in those cases, oftentimes a mortgage advisor can help.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great.
Are there other questions regarding that stuff?
That's great. Yeah, a couple of things. Firstly, what about if somebody has signed as a guarantor for one of their children, let's say, and then they want to take their own mortgage? Then the bank obviously takes that into account as well. Now, sometimes they may not know if it's another account, but for some situations, it's coming off a small amount from our own account, and then the bank sees that too. How does that affect in terms of getting a mortgage? They look at it as an amount.
Signing for someone in and itself is not a commitment, an ongoing commitment. It's an ongoing commitment because they actually have to get into the shoes of the person who's taking the loan or whatever. However, they won't necessarily look at it in terms of the person's ability to pay back. However, if it's a large amount, they may say, okay, we need to be a little bit more careful, whatever, but in and of itself, it should not stop somebody from getting their own mortgage. Mm-hmm. If they're paying their children's mortgage from their accounts, it's as if money continually is coming out of the account on a basis, on a monthly basis, then it's like a loan, and they'll take that into account.
Mm-hmm. How about also if somebody, on a separate topic, but also to do with mortgages, if somebody doesn't need a full mortgage amount, but they're debating whether to consider it as a mashkanta, a mortgage, or to take a loan of a couple of 100,000 shekel, what would you suggest? Is it purely related to what the rebate is, or are there other factors to take into account too?
There are a couple other factors. It's primarily according to what the interests are. Mortgage, if it's a straight mortgage for purposes of buying a property, their interest rates are significantly less than on commercial loans. Okay? That being said, if someone only needs the loan, it's a relatively small amount, and they only need the loan for a short amount of time, taking a mortgage does require, it's a mortgage, which means a lien on the property. It does require getting an evaluation, a survey on the property. There are other expenses that you need to take into account. Also in Israel, we do require mortgage takers to have life insurance up into the amount, for the amount of the mortgage. And the insurance is basically in lien to the mortgage itself. Many of us don't at first think that's crazy or whatnot. However, I know of so many people, unfortunately, or fortunately in these cases, where they've taken a mortgage and one of the spouses has passed away, and the surviving spouse may or may not have work, or may not by themselves be able to pay that mortgage. They've lost their spouse, but they kept their house and the mortgage is paid off through that life insurance. It's a very good thing to have, but with one caveat. If you're over a certain age and you're taking a mortgage, the amount that you'll have to pay for the insurance may be so high that it may not be worth it. And oftentimes the mortgage bank will, because of that, the bank will forego that requirement. Oftentimes. It's usually
That's
people
exactly
over 50.
One of the questions we had, which you probably saw the question, right?
No, I didn't.
You didn't. Funny enough, because that question came up now.
It's, you know, the difference between an optimist and a realist is that a realist is an optimist with experience. I've you know, seen these things before. Usually over the age of 50, the premiums are higher, and it may be more difficult for someone to take a mortgage. And oftentimes the bank will forego on that requirement. Although
Right,
if you
so
ask
the
me,
question here was, is it better to do a halvat chutzbankait, if it is not through the bank, if you're over 60, and to avoid costly life insurance connected to the mortgage?
It depends who's giving you the halva chutz bankait. If you're talking about what we say in Hebrew, the shukafo, you want to be careful who you're taking loans from and at what conditions you're taking them. By the way, those are businesses too. And a chutz bankai, in English, a loan not from the bank but from other sources, they could be quite expensive as well. So you really need to be careful who you're taking a loan from,
right?
What kind of organization you're taking it from or individual. That being said, I was initially talking about taking a loan, a commercial loan versus a mortgage for X amount of money for X, Y period of time. It mostly depends on how much you're going to be paying. Like I said, I'm just going over what I just went over a couple minutes ago. But it also takes into account all the extra expenses that you may have to make. Now, that question, do I go to somebody or not? It really depends who you're taking the loan from and what you're putting up as collateral as well.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay, David, we're starting to run out of time. Let's move on to another topic. In terms of credit cards, we have a question here regarding credit card limits, and maybe talk about that, what people can do to raise their limits. Bank Israel, I understand, also made a whole lot of changes lately that they set the limit down and you have to request for it to be put up again, or if somebody suddenly finds the limit is less.
Correct, because the limits themselves, there's two different ways of getting credit cards. You can do it directly through the credit card company, or you can do it through the bank. If you do it through the bank and you're getting it, now there's advantages and disadvantages to both. Your credit card, if you're doing it through the bank, is totally connected to your account, and everything you do on the card and through the machines and whatnot, it's all connected to your account. Okay, so you can take your credit card to the ATM machine and you could always see what's going on with your account, because ATM machines, by the way, are not just for giving money. ATM machines in Israel are for payments, are for getting information. They're multi-usage. So the ATM machines here, in many ways, were much ahead of, and I know it's always been that way, we're much ahead of what is usually happening in North America as well. Getting back to the two different types, if you get a credit card from the banks are required to have X amount of money that they hold on to through the Bank of Israel. So that's why they've had to lower, if they're giving you credit, they have to make sure that they cover that as well. So the banks have had to lower the limits they're giving people. Why do people need, we don't necessarily need so much on our credit cards as well, though. Most of us aren't doing things on payment or shouldn't be doing things on payments. And if you, let's say you've got a 30,000 shekel or let's say a 10,000 shekel credit limit on your credit card. Now there's a credit card limit, and that's different from your overdraft limit. You can have 10,000 shekels on your overdraft, and you can have 10,000 shekels on your credit card, and you can have 10,000 shekels on your spouse's credit card as well. They're all different limits, okay? So you can have both at the same time, or all three at the same time. Now, let's say you have 10,000 shekels on your credit card, and you've just bought a refrigerator for 8,000 shekels over 10 payments. You've basically used 8,000 shekels of that 10,000 shekel that you have a limit. And if you need to go shopping and your shopping is 3,000 shekels, you're going to have a problem because you've only got 2,000 shekels left over. In another month, 800 is going to come off because we said 10 payments, 8,000 shekels, 800. The next month, you're going to have 2,200 shekels open, but that's only for that. What if you want to buy, my wife's Australian, so I'm used to saying petrol, gas. If you're going to go out and you want to buy gas as well, and your credit card actually may be knocked down. So people do want to raise their credit limits as much as possible on their credit cards, but you don't need to go overboard either. Because most of us don't clog up our credit cards that much with payments. And most of us don't do 30,000, although everyone's an individual and everyone does what they want to do with their money or whatnot. 20,000, 30,000 shekels a month probably should be enough. 10,000 is enough for most people as well. Is that clear the way I've discussed that?
Yeah, that's
Because
clear.
I can't see people's faces.
You can't see
right?
anyone. I know, that's clear. In fact, in a moment, I'm going to take off the spotlight and you'll see some are without photos anyway. So one quick question about that. And then we've got time for one more topic that we want to talk about, what we discussed before about the idea of if you have extra savings, that these days you don't earn that much from the bank in terms of putting it in Peri. Before we get to that, just one quick question in terms of, if you see you have an expensive month and you need to split your credit card payments, is it better to take a loan or to divide your credit card payments? In terms, if it's a short-term thing, not a long-term thing that you would want to take a loan.
Okay, if you're dividing your credit card payments, you're taking a loan. You're just taking a loan from the credit card company. If you're doing it for 1 month or 2 months or whatever, then the difference in terms of even though the interest rates is usually much higher for credit card companies than you would get on taking a loan from the bank. But if it's for such a short period and it's probably not going to be for such a huge amount of money, then that difference, if it's worth the time for you to deal with taking a loan from the bank, although most banks digitally will give you a loan just like that, it's really easy to take loans today. That doesn't mean you need to. Take a loan only when you need to. So in answer to that question, if it's for a short period of time and not a huge amount of money or whatnot, then neither here nor there. In Arabic, nafs al-ishi, it's pretty much the same thing. Bank loans are usually cheaper than overdraft facilities or credit card loans.
Right.
Okay.
Great. Okay. David, our last topic that we have time for today, let's talk about the idea about, is it worthwhile if you have extra money? Do you just leave it in your account? What do you suggest with it? Do you put it in Peri? The psychological impact?
Right.
And I'm going to take you off spotlight for a moment now.
Okay. First of all, you're not going to make a whole hell lot of money on anything that you're doing in terms of anything in the bank right now. Interest rates, although they have gone up over the last couple of months, are still pathetically low. Okay? You're not going to make money in the bank by putting money in deposits. You'll make a little bit of money or whatnot. And by the way, you're going to pay tax on that one way or the other anyway, but only on the earnings. You don't pay tax on the principal, don't worry. But there is a psychological side to things as well. By the way, I often told my clients, if they have money left over every month, do a horat keva, do a standing order and put X amount of money aside and forget about it. Okay, you're not going to make a lot of interest on it. But after a year, all of a sudden you're going to have some money that you didn't know you'd even put aside money. And there's an important thing. Now, that being said, if you're an overdraft and you're putting money aside and there's no specific need for that money aside, or even if there is, there's no reason to be an overdraft and pay interest to the bank, because I promise you that the interest that you're going to pay to the bank or the credit card company is going to be more than the amount of money you're going to make on that term deposit or savings plan or whatnot. We started this by saying banks are a business. They make money by giving you money, and they'll give you money by using your money or whatnot, but they're going to make more money off the money that you give them.
Mm-hmm. So are you saying, David, are you saying that if somebody has a standing Kupat Gemel amount or Keren Hishtamut or something that they put away, but they've got a difficult couple of months that they need to go into overdraft, are you saying rather to put a hold in it for a couple of months?
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that.
What do you suggest?
I'm saying that if we're talking about term deposits, you've got 20, 30,000 shekels aside in a term deposit that's earning prime plus 0.5% annually, maybe, or whatever, then you have to think twice whether you want to use that money. Keren Ishtamut is a totally different thing, and it's really it's a wonderful savings plan. And over time, if people don't know, and I have a couple of minutes, a Keren Ishtamut is an Israeli thing that it started with people in education that would they would put money aside, them and the state would put money aside. They would put 2.5%, and the state would put 2.5 or 5% of their monthly salary aside, and then they would go on sabbatical for a year, and they would use it to pay for courses that we'd be taking during the sabbatical. That developed into the rest of the workforce. Most employers would give this to their workers as well. And the really nice thing about it is, okay, you can't touch that money for 6 years in most cases, unless you can touch it after 3 years, but you have to pay a lot of tax or whatever. But the money is all as of right now, and every year they want to tax it, but it's not taxable money right now. And over time, this isn't a good year right now because the markets have gone totally down and we've all taken a hit in the markets. And Keren Ishtalmut and Kupot Gemel, Providence funds, all invest in the markets right now. So they've all not made money this year, but over a 5-year or a 10-year period, they all have made good money for all of us. And the Keren Ishtalmut itself is tax-free. So no, I would not necessarily automatically say use your Keren Ishtalmut because you'd have to think twice about using it. But if you do have money on the side in your account in a term deposit, a non-linked term deposit that is pretty much open on a monthly or weekly or daily basis, that one I would think of using because there's no sense paying money to the bank. Right. On the other hand, there is the psychological factor of, you have something on the side that is liquid that you could always use. So
right, and that you're not going to use it. Yeah.
There's the economic way of thinking about things, but there's psychology as well. And I wouldn't say that psychology is less than economic in many cases.
Right, absolutely. Okay.
The only two things I want to say beforehand, and we didn't talk about it as well, it's something I've been fighting with the banks for over 30 years. Internet banking is really good in Hebrew. It's excellent in Hebrew. And in English, it's pathetic. In English, you can get information in all the banks, none of the banks. And I've been told 101 reasons. It's the whole left-right issue in terms of Hebrew and English and whatnot. I don't necessarily buy it. It doesn't pay for the banks to invest a lot of money in the infrastructure it would take to make it both English and Hebrew. And that's the basics behind it. In English, it's good. It's good for information, not for transactions. In Hebrew, it's excellent. That being said, with a little bit of practice and with a little bit of a dictionary and a Google Translate, whatnot, you can learn really quickly and you can make yourself a list and you can start doing things. And it's actually a really good tool because internet banking in Hebrew is very easy in most of the banks. I know the bank I worked for, but I also, with some of my clients, I had to look at their things in other banks, and I saw how it works in most of the banks. It's really, really good. Many people, I'm at that age where I'm sort of in between and whatnot. So I'm not like my kids in terms of their digital savvy or whatnot, but my 86-year-old mother is doing digital banking as well in the States. So yes, it's possible. The other thing also, this is an idea for you. This is an idea for you as well, Lesley, is because we touched on it a little bit, but it's something that comes up with all of my clients. Maybe you'll bring someone to talk about wills. I don't know if you've done that or not. Bring in an attorney to talk about wills. There's all kinds now. There's the Mitmashech one as well. The new one the new way of doing it. Wills are very important, and that's a food for thought for all of you. My wife and I did this years ago already, and our kids, some of them weren't even above the age of 18. Now all of them are over 18. but it's a really important thing, because if we can save people, and it affects the way they do things in the bank as well. That's why I'm bringing this up. If you can save hassle and discord amongst the people who you love, then help them by not getting rid of the money issue as much as possible.
Right. Excellent.
I want to thank you, because I haven't done this in over a year now and actually had kind of fun, even though I can't see the people I'm speaking with. But if there are other questions, I'd be happy to answer them as well. But thank you all.
Fantastic. So firstly, David Baruch, former Bank of Poly manager and now tour guide to be. So if you like David's way to be, then you can contact him as a future tour guide. Thank you very much for all your information. Obviously, we were limited to 1 hour. We try to answer as many questions as we can. If we didn't answer your question, it could be that it was too personal and not really relevant for everyone else. So please speak to your bank directly about it. So we're going to log off. Thank you again for joining us. Sponsored again by AACI. David, thank you so much. We had a wonderful time and got a lot of good information. Good night. Thank you very much.